Good afternoon, good morning. Uh, Welcome to this program. There are some things in life over which we can debate and discuss, and we can even, at the end of the day, agree to disagree. But there are others, like truth, the reality, well established facts, over which we cannot afford to disagree. Because if we do, progress itself will be impossible. I think Zimbabwe, we have been caught up in this meaningless debate over whether or not elections are free, fair, and credible. It really is becoming nauseating. Are we failing to understand what constitutes free, fair, and credible elections? So why are we failing to agree on the fact that Zimbabwean elections are not free, fair, and credible? Why is that so difficult to understand? That is so fundamental. After 43 years of elections, by now we should have arrived to the point where we are saying, well, the election process is so flawed, it really is now meaningless to pretend we can still have free, fair, and credible elections, producing a legitimate government at the end of the day. And yet, this is exactly where we are now as a nation. We are finding ourselves stuck because some people will not accept that Zanu PF is rigging the 2023 elections. I'd like you to listen to this video of the MDC leader, Mahere, speaking in Geneva.
Our next speaker is a leading democracy activist and opposition spokesperson, a human rights lawyer who was arrested multiple times as part of a new generation of freedom seekers in Zimbabwe. Mahere is someone who has a master's of law from the University of Cambridge. She enjoyed a distinguished legal career abroad, worked for the International Criminal Court in The Hague, for the UN International Human Rights Tribunal in Rwanda, and she could have stayed in abroad and had a very prominent legal career, but she went back home to Zimbabwe, which in many ways is a failed state, and has the courage to speak out against the government. She was arrested multiple times. We didn't know she'd be able to make it here to Geneva if her passport wouldn't be taken away. We're really thrilled that you're here with us. Fadzai, you have the floor.
Thank you, Hillel. 2 years ago, I woke up in a maximum security prison in Zimbabwe with no toilet, no water, and no underwear. Inmates ate watery porridge with our hands because we were not permitted spoons. Before lights off, we had to line up in queues for roll call. Groups A, B, C, or D. D was for dangerous. And even though the other women there had committed murder, armed robbery, and infanticide, I was put in the dangerous group, all because of a tweet. So it might surprise you that after repeated arrests and wrongful imprisonment, I've come here today to the UN, optimistic, because the crackdown now taking place in Zimbabwe is a sign that we're winning. Even within his own party, Mr. Mnangagwa is weak. Their own intelligence tells them that the opposition will win this election in the coming summer. I I'm the national spokesperson for the Citizens Coalition for Change, the country's main opposition party. Because we dare to challenge the system, I've been arrested repeatedly. My car has been smashed 4 times. I survived an armed robbery on my house. And then in 2021, local police slammed into a bus and hurt a baby. I remember seeing a video of the mother carrying a pale, limp baby, crying, grabbing the police officer by the collar, crying, "He killed my baby." I tweeted against this egregious act of police brutality. I said, this is rogue policing. It's a disproportionate.
Well, she's went on to describe the situation there. But what I really wanted to focus on is this issue of CCC is winning the 2023 elections. The regime is in a panic because CCC is going to win. This is at an international forum. We at CCC are telling the international world that Zimbabwe or CCC is going to win 2023 elections, regardless of the evidence on the ground. How is that possible? We know we have not got a verified voters roll. 3 million Zimbabweans in the diaspora were denied the vote. We have got video evidence of Mnangagwa himself saying how Zanu PF is going to frog march the rural voters to vote for Zanu PF. We know that Zanu PF is loaded. One of the benefits of the rampant corruption and looting that has been taking place in the country is that it has made Mnangagwa and his fellow ruling elite incredibly rich. And they're using some of that looted wealth to bankroll their vote rigging juggernaut. The evidence, we can go on and on and on. The evidence is already there that Zanu PF is rigging these elections. So why is CCC hell-bent on participating in these elections? She is telling the international world there, the UN, that CCC is winning. So if I was in the UN, I would say, well, if CCC is winning, there's no point in us insisting that the elections should be free, fair, and credible. This is the wrong message we are sending out. And I can tell you now, she, as the spokesperson of the party, will be one of the leaders coming forward after the election, the morning after the election, claiming that the elections were rigged. Now she's denying, or she is dismissing that the fact that the elections are going to be rigged by insisting they will still win them. They're participating in this election regardless of all the evidence of rigging. But the morning after, she'll claim the elections were rigged. How many times have we heard that? This is absolutely nonsensical. If CCC are participating in these elections, knowing fully well of all the flaws in the electoral process, then they must also say so here and now that after the elections, they are not going to complain that the elections were rigged because they knew the elections would be rigged. But even if they were to say that, the truth of the matter is, it is the ordinary Zimbabwean who will pay the bill. We have been stuck in these meaningless elections in which Zanu PF end up winning, and then we have to put up with the corrupt, incompetent, tyrannical regime. And this has lasted for 45 years. How many more years are we going to allow this to happen? The truth of the matter is, Mahere and their colleagues are participating in these elections, knowing fully well that Zanu PF is rigging these elections. But they also know that Zanu PF is giving away a few urban seats to entice the opposition to participate. And this is what they cannot resist. She is hoping she'll be one of the few CCC leaders who wins the seat on the gravy train. And when she addresses the press the morning after the elections, claiming the elections were rigged, it will be only the crocodile tears. That will not stop her taking a seat on the gravy train. Of course not. And so the circus will go on. The truth of the matter is, MDC had the golden opportunity to implement the democratic reforms which would have stopped Zanu PF rigging the elections during the 2008 to 2018 GNU. They became so comfortable in the GNU. Mugabe saw to it that they were comfortable. Morgan Changirai, Nelson Chamisa, Tendai Biti, all the senior MDC leaders were ministers, and they were all given the E-Class Mercedes-Benz, generous allowances and salaries. And for Morgan Changirai himself, he got his $4 million mansion in Highlands. They became so comfortable that they forgot about the democratic reforms. As one of the Zanu PF cronies posted at the time, when asked why was MDC not implementing the democratic reforms, and he said, Mazwane MDC atiza kujikanyerere. In other words, MDC leaders have learned to enjoy the benefits of the gravy train. They will not rock the boat. Of course he was right. Having failed to implement even one meaningful democratic reform, when they had the golden opportunity, the 5 years to do so, MDC leaders found themselves in 2018 having to decide whether or not to boycott the elections. I think some people have misunderstood the reality then. When Sadak told Morgan Changirai and some of his MDC friends in June 2018 that if you go into the elections, you will lose because the elections are already fixed. MDC, Morgan Changirai and friends had the option of withdrawing, but they could not do so for two reasons. As as David Coulthard admitted in his book, they could not trust each other. There were two main factions then, the MDC Nube, the MDC T, led by Morgan Tsvangirai. They could not trust each other to withdraw from the elections. Because if the other side participated in the withdrawal, they would win the few seats on offer. And that is why they could not withdraw out of greed. But there is the other reason, and that reason was that having failed to implement the democratic reforms throughout the 5 years of the GNU, what grounds would MDC have? SADC's argument was that you should not participate in these elections because you need democratic reforms. Zanu PF had a counter argument to that, as demonstrated by the interview that then Minister of Justice and Parliamentary Affairs, Patrick Chinamasa, demonstrated on return from Mozambique, where Zanu PF was itself also under pressure to not to go ahead with the 2013 elections without reforms. Patrick Chinamasa called an interview in which he invited the press and the diplomats from SADC countries and other countries. And in that interview, he told them that we cannot postpone the 2013 elections on the basis of we want to implement reforms, because there are no outstanding reforms to be implemented. And he was able to say to them, look, I was the Minister of Justice and Parliamentary Affairs, and I know parliamentary business. There was no proposed democratic reform proposal submitted in Parliament which has been delayed in any way. In fact, in the last 4 or 5 years of the GNU, there's been not even one single democratic reform proposal submitted in Parliament. If so, I challenge the opposition to say what proposal that is. That is when the penny dropped for SADC itself. They suddenly realized the boasting by some of these Zanu PF cronies that MDC leaders were too comfortable to rock the boat was true. For 5 years of the GNU, MDC had failed to implement even one meaningful reform. Not even one. I think we have a situation here where the international community have got to accept that we not only have a corrupt and tyrannical ruling party, but we also have a corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless opposition. CCC is not going to win big these 2023 elections. They have got to give that impression to justify their participation. The truth of the matter is, they are after the few gravy train seats that Zanu PF is offering. They will be the ones complaining the morning after that the elections were rigged. And I think it is totally irresponsible to allow them to get away with this nonsense time and time again. After the 2013 elections, Morgan Changira and his MDC friends got together and they made a political party resolution that they will not participate in future elections without reforms. That was in 2014. But within a year, they'd flipped over. They were going to participate regardless. And this is the situation we are in. MDC leaders, Advocate Fazai Mahere knows as well as anybody else that Zanu PF is rigging the 2023 elections. She and their friends and their colleagues are participating out of greed. They are after the few seats that Zanu PF is offering, but of course they will not admit that they're participating out of greed. So they've got to convince their followers that they're going to win. They've got strategies of winning rigged elections. I put it to the UN itself. That is, the UN now started endorsing rigged elections. I thought the right of every citizen to a meaningful say in the governance of their country is enshrined in the UN Charter for Human Rights. Here is a party that is now disregarding that and saying that is a privilege. The right to a meaningful, free, fair, and credible election is a privilege. We are going to participate in these elections knowing fully well that hundreds of thousands of fellow Zimbabweans will be frog-marched to vote for Zanu PF. We don't care about that, as long as we win the few seats Zanu PF is offering us bait. I think the UN should be honest with Zimbabwe's corrupt opposition and tell them that these elections must be free, fair, and credible. And if Fazai Mahere and their colleagues are saying they are free, fair, and credible, that's one thing. They should participate and go ahead and maybe explain to the UN all these other anomalies, the blatant violence, the failure to produce even something as basic as a verified voter's roll. If the UN are going to ignore all those facts on the ground, I think they have now become a party to shortchanging the ordinary people of Zimbabwe. They are endorsing a process which they know is flawed. That cannot be accepted. CCC MDC was launched in 1999, 23 years later, including the 5 years in the GNU. They failed to implement even one democratic reform. And yet this was at the very heart of the party. The party was called the Movement for Democratic Change. That was the democratic changes that they promised the people. People have risked life and limb to vote these people on the understanding they will deliver democratic change. They haven't. And now they're shortchanging people and telling them they don't need democratic change because they've got ways of winning rigged elections. We have listened to this nonsense all these years. And I think somebody has got to stand up and say, no, this is nonsense. And we cannot carry on with this insanity. Triple C are participating in these elections, knowing fully well that Zanu PF is rigging them. They are participating in these elections, knowing fully well that by participating, they are giving the process legitimacy and the results legitimacy. They're doing all these things regardless, out of greed, pure and simple. And I think the UN of all bodies should uphold its own charter and ask, I'm sure she's still there in Geneva, whether or not Triple C have now abandoned the UN Charter, whether or not Triple C now think that the right to free, fair, and credible elections is a privilege. This is the relevant question that the UN must ask. They cannot keep on inviting people like her and giving the whole process, this flawed electoral process, some modicum of credibility, international recognition, by inviting people like this who come and pretend that Zimbabwean elections are free, fair, and credible. Because we know the morning after the election should be the one claiming that the elections were rigged. We have heard this so many times. It is totally unacceptable to keep on allowing this kind of nonsense to carry on. I think this is the challenge to the international community itself. They've treated the opposition in Zimbabwe with kid gloves. And it is the ordinary Zimbabweans who have paid the price for it. Triple C are no longer championing democratic change. They are quite content to participate in these elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy in return for a few seats on the credit train. This is the kind of sellout that has brought Zimbabwe to the mess we are in. And to get out of it, we need to call a spade a spade. Triple C no longer represent the ordinary Zimbabwean. That is a fact. We cannot keep on discussing historic facts and truth and pretending that they don't exist. We need to make progress here. Triple C are participating in these elections, knowing fully well that Zanu PF is rigging these elections, and that by participating, they're giving Zanu PF legitimacy. They're participating regardless, out of greed, pure and simple. That is a well-established historic fact. And I think the UN will do us a favor, the people of Zimbabwe, a great favor, by accepting that historic fact and treating sellouts like Mahere accordingly. We are not interested in meaningless elections anymore. We are not interested in people who pretend that elections are free, fair, and credible just because they are after the few gravy train seats. This has got to end. And Zanu PF must be denied political legitimacy at the end of these flawed elections for two reasons. One, because the process is flawed. How can we say that an election in which there is not even a verified voters roll can produce a legitimate government? Some people have used the excuse of the opposition participating to cover for, well, if Zimbabweans are participating, who are we to criticize the process? Well, Zimbabweans, these opposition parties are participating out of pure greed. There is absolutely no other excuse for participating. Greed. And I think it is high time that organizations like SADC and the UN begin to accept that reality. We cannot keep on pretending that the opposition is fighting on the people's corner. They are not. That is a fact, a well-established historic fact. And we need to make progress here. We cannot keep on pretending that they are fighting in the people's corner. They are not. They are after the few gravy train seats, and they will sell the people's chance of free, fair, and credible elections for the sake of their own greed. That is something worth fighting for, and we are going to fight for it. And we are disappointed that we have got to confront organizations like SADC and the UN on something that should be obvious to all of us. Countries like Switzerland, where she is, have held free, fair, and credible elections. The whole of Europe have held free, fair, and credible elections. Countries like South Africa in our SADC region have held free, fair, and credible elections. Can they honestly put their hands on their heart and say you can have free, fair, and credible elections when you do not even have a verified voters roll? When hundreds of thousands of people are frog marched to go and vote for a particular party? When there's so much violence and intimidation that no one can honestly say there is a meaningful democratic discourse in this process. So why are they pretending that somehow the standards in Zimbabwe should be lowered to accommodate all that? Just because the opposition pretends those things, even if they exist, they can still win. Yeah, I think we need to move on. CCC, and just like the party before it, MDC, have lost political credibility. That is a fact. And we need to move on. And a discredited opposition's participation should not be used as an excuse to give a vote rigging Zanu PF political credibility. That is the message. We are going to drive that message home throughout these elections. Thank you and good night.